Well, hello and welcome to this very, very special edition of Wednesday Palaver. Today's Wednesday Palaver is dedicated to the observance of Ghana's Day of Shame. Today is Ghana's Day of Shame because this is the anniversary of the overthrow of the government of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah by the most reactionary centers of the world, led by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America. Today was the day on which Ghanaian collaborators of Western imperialists came together and dealt a blow to the national liberation struggles across the African continent. Today is the anniversary of that day on which the effort of the African people to build a new society based on unity and the principles of socialism was attacked by these reactionary forces. But Africa today suffers illiteracy, suffers hunger, suffers poverty, suffers all manner of deprivation and so on, can partly be attributed to the reckless betrayal carried out by the forces of reaction and the agents of imperialism in Ghana on February 24, 1966. This program today is dedicated to the observance of that disgraceful day in our history. This program today is designed to remind us of the attack we suffered on February 24, 1966. This program today is designed to enable us reflect on our history and to enable us to gather strength from our history and to say to ourselves and the world that never again would we allow this betrayal. Today's program is designed to rekindle the spirit of resistance, to make us stand up against those forces that overthrew the Nkrumah government, and to make sure they are defeated at every turn of our history. Today's program is very, very special in many respects. And one of the respects in which today's program is very, very special is the presence in this studio of my very good friend and comrade, Dr. Gamal Nasser Adam, who used to teach at the Modern Languages Department of the University of Ghana, and who now, I'm told, is the Vice President for Academic Affairs of the Islamic University. Dr. Nasser has been a fellow combatant in the struggle to build a new Ghana, a new Africa, and a new world. Dr. Nasser is one who has always believed that the people will triumph over their enemies, and that in the triumph of the people will emerge a new society in which there will be no hunger, a new society in which the equality of citizens would have true meaning, and so on. And we have especially invited Dr. Nasser here today to lead us in a discussion of Ghana's Day of Shame, 55 years after the overthrow of the Nkrumah government. And it's my pleasure to welcome to the microphone Dr. Gamal Nasser Adam.
Thank you very much, Comrade Kwesi Pratt. It's always been a pleasure sharing the same platform with him, although he usually sets the standard so high, he lifts the bar so high that the rest of us find it very difficult to measure up. But today's topic, and today as he rightly indicated, is a special day. Special day in the sense that it's actually a day of shame. And I'll try to demonstrate that somewhere along my presentation. We all know now, it has been established, that the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America, and British intelligence were involved in the overthrow of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. What's usually missing in the discourse is why did they overthrow Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah? Or, if not missing, but treated in a very perfunctory manner. And we need to delve into that. So why was it? Why was it that Ghana under Kwame Nkrumah was so much of concern to the powers, the world powers of the time, that is the British, the British Empire was just, had just collapsed, but Britain was still a major power, and especially the United States of America. Everything had to do with the stability of the imperialist world order. And in this particular world order, which is a very cynical one, Africa's role can be divided into two. One is to serve as a source of the supply of raw materials, that's material resources, also serve as markets and also as investment outlets for Europe, America, and Japan and the West in general. The second rule was for Africa or the so-called developing countries to serve as buffer zones or shock absorbers for, the system has been facing cyclical crisis. The international, capitalist system has been facing crisis over and over again. So we in the periphery, the second role that we play in this order is for us to serve as shock absorbers or what others would call the buffer zone to cushion or stabilize the crisis when they occur. And how is it this, how do we do this? How do they do this? How do they ensure that we serve as the buffer zone? One of such methods is to lower the price of our exports. They have a system of passing off the burden, of adjusting the order when the crisis occurs. They pass off the burden onto us through several means. One is to lower the prices for our exports. If you listen to engineer Robert Wood, he's come out with the analysis saying that if you compare the amount of, the quantity of cocoa that was used to exchange at that time one VW Beetle, and before VW Beetle closed down at the last count, the amount of cocoa that you needed to exchange for the one VW Beetle had, more than quadrupled within a space of just one generation. So the other method of passing off the price of adjustment is higher prices for our imports. Then they also have a tendency of manipulating our currencies, and causing the values to fall relative to the so-called international currencies. The other thing is the super exploitation of labor, that is ensuring that the government suppress labor wages, especially, and limit labor rights. And the final, familiar one is the higher interest charges on the so-called debts that we owe them. The next question is, why has imperialism been so successful in implementing this very cynical international, exploitative international economic order? Why has it been so successful over the generations? There's an African saying that when the witches enter a house, it means that someone has opened the door. Yeah. So throughout the years, they have been able to cultivate a fifth column, an internal fifth column of traitors, whom they have relied on to ensure that this exploitation continues. We all know that for more than 100 years, the British were here, and they had enough time to create the political, economic, and then the social structures that would ensure that the colonial exploitation would continue even long after they have departed. So what did they do? They groomed an exclusive class of technocrats, political actors, and especially intellectuals. I hope we'll have have time one day to deal with this particular subject, which is my area of special interest. That is the role that the intellectuals have played in perpetuating this system of international inequality and perpetuating the crisis of our underdevelopment, and how come imperialism has been very successful over the years. So these classes of people that the departing colonialists groomed, they were programmed with that imperialist ideology. And it's usually this group of people that the departing colonialists would prefer to hand over power to when they are going, when they are leaving, when they are forced to leave, or when they are disengaging. And they normally will reward them with a political office, lucrative jobs, foreign bank accounts, sometimes executive positions in multinational corporations. And some of them who distinguished themselves very well in this treacherous, symbiosis are even knighted. And I'm sure there's a typical Ghanaian example of someone who was conferred a knighthood, and we know his relationship with multinational corporations. Unfortunately for imperialism, the plan to bequeath the bequeath power to this elite group in the Gold Coast was not going according to the script that they had written. Also, the dream of the Gold Coast elite to inherit the colonial privileges were being dashed by the masses of the people of Gold Coast under the leadership of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. I'm sure you have also read or heard that when they realized that when this elite who were expecting to step into the shoes of the departing colonialists, sensed danger that might not be the case, they sent a delegation to Britain with a message to the British government to delay independence, asking them, wondering why the British were such in a hurry to leave the Gold Coast. This was an overt endorsement of colonialism, colonial rule, and colonial exploitation. But that was not new. And we should understand it within the context of what we call the class struggle. They were playing, these elite who went to the colonial metropolis to ask for the delay in conferring independence on the Gold Coast. They were just playing their class role, because historically it was their aristocratic ancestors who played the role of slave hunters and middlemen during the transatlantic slave trade, and then they were rewarded with crumbs from the slave profits. Under direct colonialism, they, together with the colonial merchants, the traditional feudal lords, they worked hand in glove to share in the colonial booty. So when we say, it's a day of shame, we look at that in that context. I'm sure if these elite, you tell them that there's no difference between them ideologically, between them and the slave hunters, they would want to deny it. But that's exactly what it is from that historical perspective. There's little difference between the two. The only thing separating them is the time and then the epoch. This fifth column that I'm talking about is still very active today in assisting imperialism to siphon resources worth billions, not millions, billions with a B, dollars out of Africa. And I'm sure you are familiar with the Ghanaian example, the scandals. Not too long ago, the fraudulent divestiture of Ghana's 70% share of Ghana Telecom to Vodafone. We are also aware of, in that, the former President Kufuor actively participated and benefited from it. We are also aware of the criminal conduct of the Cosmos Energy and its Ghanaian accomplices, in the nascent, oil industry in Ghana. And the more recent scandals, under the Nanado government, the Kelny GVG, PDS, and the murky Ajapa deal. These are all examples of that symbiotic collaboration between the neocolonial elite and their imperialist counterparts. In fact, somewhere in 2015, the African Union set up this high-level panel on illicit finance flows, and it was chaired by the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki. And the report stated that between 50 and $148 billion, billion with a B, is lost to Africa annually since the year 2000 through crimes, tax evasion, criminal enterprise, and corruption perpetrated by multinational corporations, and that they do this with the active connivance with their local accomplices. This amount, if you multiply that by over the years, it's several orders of magnitude higher than the so-called development aid that these advanced countries purport to be giving to Africa. In those instances where imperialism has failed to manipulate the independence process, and were forced to hand over to the patriotic forces, they did not just throw up their hands and, pack and go. They did not do that. They were still active in ensuring that that exploitative global order still existed. So what did they do? Imperialism resorted to subversion as an operating principle. And that subversion was anchored on the politics of 3 Bs. The first B stands for bribe, the second B stands for block, and the third B stands for break. So the first attempt is to try to to bribe the new leadership. If the bribery does not work, then they try to block, put obstacles on the way of progress. Then the last B is to break, usually through a coup d'etat or sparking of a military insurgency to make sure that you're not stable enough to carry out your development agenda. Under Kwame Nkrumah, Comrade Kwesi Pratt made references to that. I think somewhere in the documentary we are all aware that the problems that he had, that diverted his attention from concentrating on the core mandate of transforming the national economy. First, we had the very hostile Western media campaign against Kwame Nkrumah, very hostile media campaign against him. Then he also faced naked terrorism and a violent campaign of bombings and outright economic sabotage. And the part of that strategy was to squeeze the economy. In the words of one American, should I call him statesman, was it Henry Kissinger? He said that they would squeeze the economy until it would scream. Okay? Make it difficult for them, squeeze the economy and make it scream. So that's how come they aggressively manipulated cocoa prices, at the height of the 7-year development plan, and caused the cocoa prices to plummet far, 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 far below, to record levels, with the sole purpose of throwing the 7-year development plan out of gear. So they do this in order to set the stage for a coup d'etat. And all this just to protect the global imperialist order. There are several other examples. It's not only Ghana, throughout the world, throughout the developing world, and with specific reference to Africa, there are a couple of examples. But before then, you are aware of the CIA-sponsored overthrow of Chile's Salvador Allende, a democratically elected government, which was anti-imperialist. He started implementing some socialist policies, and the United States of America would not have, anything to do with that. So they used those 3 Bs and relied finally on the final B, the breaking and causing a coup d'etat. It's also behind this, for more than 50 years, Cuba has been suffering, has been subjected to a United States blockade or sanctions, all because to protect that global, economic order, imperialist economic order. And why is socialist Venezuela also a target? It's all part of that agenda. Then we also have this confrontational, belligerent posturing against the Islamic Republic of Iran, just because it's pursuing an independent economic and foreign policy. No. On the contrary, you see that they support, regimes that do not respond to the legitimate aspirations of their people. Mention can be made here of the 30-year autocratic rule of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, aggressively supported by the United States of America. And now, the support still continues under this present leadership, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. There are other examples specific to Africa. Remember Patrice Lumumba, the Katanga secession and the murder of Patrice Lumumba of the Congo, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. And many people don't know this. Idi Amin was actually installed by British and Israeli, by the British and the Israelis against, it was Milton Obote. Milton Obote had a certain mild anti-imperialist disposition. Idi Amin was actually installed by British and the Israelis. So, and closer to home, if you're too young to witness it, you must have heard of it. The Nigerian Civil War. The oil multinational corporations played an active role in the Nigerian Civil War, and specifically the abortive coup of 1976, in which General Murtala Rufai Muhammad was assassinated. Murtala Rufai Muhammad was a very progressive, African military ruler. He was one who defied America and recognized the MPLA in Angola, and did many other progressive things. Okay, now back home, the abiding concern of imperialism, with all these examples, including the overthrow of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the abiding concern of imperialism, as I indicated at the beginning of the lecture, is to ensure the stability of the global capitalist system. It's also to ensure that there would not be any model of a successful alternative to neocolonial dependency. To ensure that nothing of that sort happens. If, for instance, Ghana could succeed in opting out of the global imperial system and also succeed at some form of independent development, what would prevent others from emulating that example? So the underlying message is that imperialism is always in no mood to tolerate any visionary, imaginative African leadership, committed to liquidating underdevelopment and dependency, because such leadership always disrupts, their agenda and must be bribed or blocked. When they have succeeded in dislodging these patriotic African leaders, who have committed themselves to liquidating underdevelopment, imperialism then substitutes in their place, what are described as state gangsters, incompetent politicians, and there's a certain term known as kakistocrats, that is government by the least qualified, on the least suitable, the least competent, of the citizens. Or lootocrats, from the word lootocracy, that's those, government by outright looting of the state coffers. And after imposing such inept leadership, on Africa, imperialism then turns around and points at such bankrupt leaders as an example or as evidence of Africa's inability to manage its affairs. This hypocrisy of the highest order. Still on the bribe, block, and then break politics. When they succeed in doing this, what they do is, it provides the West with the basis to penetrate the state apparatus of the host country. When they have succeeded in establishing a government that they can remote control, then it affords them the opportunity to penetrate the state apparatus of the host country, secure cheap mineral and other resource concessions, fraudulent contracts and commissions, over generous fiscal incentives, soft tax laws, easy profit repatriation, repress labor, even sometimes infiltrate the military establishment, acquire military bases, either direct or indirect, and meddle in the internal politics of the host country. In fact, it is this neo-colonial relationship which forms the central thesis of Nkrumah's book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, where Nkrumah exposes the multinational corporations not only as Trojan horses, but also as profit hyenas, and shows the how meaningless it is to have political freedom without economic freedom. That's why it was this book, especially chapter 18 of that book, that is Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, which infuriated the United States so much that they officially protested. The American government officially protested against that book, and especially against chapter 18, And when Nkrumah went ahead and distributed it at an OU summit, that was just too much for imperialism. Thereafter, preparations for the coup of February 1966 were fast-tracked. Now, let's move on to another subject area, that is speculation about what Ghana could have been today if Nkrumah had not been overthrown. And closely related to this has been the usual comparison between Ghana and South Korea, or the so-called former newly industrialized countries. And they usually cite the gulf between the levels of development of both countries, despite the fact that both, won political independence at about the same time. The response is this. This comparison is disingenuous, is dishonest, because it ignores the fact that Ghana's development was violently truncated by American and British imperialism through the 1966 coup. Let's remember that by February 1966, Ghana had laid the foundations, or Ghana and Nkrumah had laid the foundations for an economic, transformation, economic takeoff. We've heard of the very impressive infrastructural development, the network of roads, the factories, the schools, the hospitals, the fishing village that was transformed into a harbor city of Tema, the Kosombo Dam, there were 63 state enterprises. And not only that, on the the development of the manpower, manpower, education and manpower, Nkrumah achieved in 10 years more than what the colonial administration had achieved during the entire period of their presence in Ghana, more than 100 years. In 10 years, Nkrumah had achieved more than what the British had achieved for the more than 100 years that they were in the country. And after a UNESCO report of 1963 did say that, Ghana spent more on education, in proportion to her size and population than any other country in the world at the time. In actual fact, the KNUST, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, was established, to produce a critical mass of scientists, engineers, and technologists to lead in Ghana's technological transformation. The failure to fulfill this mission, now there's a mission creep, and the KNUST is losing its focus as envisaged by those who founded it. And its failure to fulfill this mission is a direct result of the lack of the national development direction, occasioned by the 66 coup. And we can talk about that critical mass of scientists and technologists if we don't refer to the 7-year development plan, which part of it was to train, the establishment of KNUST was to train a generation of scientists, technologists, well ahead of time in preparation. So there has to be a coordination, linkages, So the 7-year development plan and the creation of a body of technologists and then the scientists were critical to Ghana's industrial transformation. So the idea was the 7-year development plan was to create a balanced modern economy. And, Ghana was already successfully using local raw materials for its industries. And we're beginning to satisfy local demand for certain consumer goods. And industrial sector, Ghana registered the most impressive, results. You go and check the literature, the steelwork, the cocoa processing plant, the sugar refineries, the textile plant, printing plant, a glass factory, a chocolate factory, meat processing plant, a radio assembly plant, a large printing works, a textile mill, complex of food industries, gold refinery, a plant for the manufacture of prefabricated houses, a high-tech research program on nuclear energy, okay? Most of these had either been completed or were nearing completion. The 1966 coup came and truncated all these. And all these things were done under a program of work and happiness. Program what we adopt as work and happiness. We intended to turn Ghana into one giant workshop where the entirety of the population would be mobilized to embark on a frontal assault on the generating causes of our underdevelopment. Yeah, I've seen that most of you here are young, and you may find it difficult believing that there was a time when Ghana produced its own refrigerators, television sets, sound systems, even assembled vehicles, and so many other things. So ask yourself, why? It means that it's not the lack of capacity that's in terms of talent, but why are we not producing them now? It has nothing to do with our ability or our mental capacities. It has everything to do with leadership. Yeah. The 1966 coup halted Ghana's. This was this bold experiment, and then opened the floodgates for imperialist penetration. And that led to a total collapse of all these local initiatives. And now the situation tends to insinuate in our subconscious minds that it is only, Europe and America and non-China that can help us, develop. When in actual fact, we could have continued, under the 60s. What we need actually is a militant, no-nonsense national self-reliance program as envisaged in Nkrumah's 7-year development plan. Okay. Now, returning to the comparison between Ghana and the so-called newly industrialized countries, and especially South Korea, this has been coming up several times. Even sometimes, people who should know better, cite these examples, but not in the context of trying to explain the circumstances, okay, but rather to denigrate our efforts, which is unfortunate, And as I said, this is dishonest to ignore the facts. Because these countries did not, one, apart from the fact that our experiment, our efforts under Kwame Nkrumah was cut short, prematurely by that violent coup, there are certain things that we also need to note about what accounted for their development. The first thing is that these countries do not have any hostile imperialist powers to contend with, unlike Kwame Nkrumah. The imperialism did not bother to disturb them, and there was a reason why. Okay. Because this was at the height of the Cold War. Okay, this was at the height of the Cold War, and the roles of these countries as showcases of imperialism in that raging Cold War should be appreciated. They were whitewashed by imperialism as anti-communist bait, because at that time, communism was spreading in Southeast Asia, the Vietnam, Korea, Laos. So there was a need to find some alternatives to point at. So for the meantime, that was another front that they opened in order to dissuade the struggle against imperialism, set up some, phantom success stories and point to that as examples of what you would achieve if you are keys to imperialist control. But, so it was basically ideological propaganda in defense of the international system of robbery. The discourse also glosses over another important thing, and that, in these countries, there was, a prevailing climate of oppression and prolonged periods of repressive stability, that these countries, they leveraged these to drive their industrial development. And America and Britain, American and British imperialism just looked the other way. If you take Lee Kuan Yew, who has always been touted as, father of Singapore and a brilliant example of someone who can lift his people out of poverty, Lee Kuan Yew ruled Singapore with an iron fist for more than 30 years, from 1959 to 1990. We normally are not told that, and the stability that he imposed was not a democratic stability, but a repressive one. Okay, and this is normally missing when they are pointing to Singapore as an example to emulate. Now, on the legacy of Kwame Nkrumah, normally this is skewed in favor of the physical edifices that we have, that he constructed. Of course, these were monumental physical achievements, but more important, and I think Comrade Kwesi Pratt has had occasion to point this out, that the raising of the political consciousness of the people was a fundamental, moment in the struggle that Kwame Nkrumah was engaged in, and for the Gold Coast. And then, so the fight against neocolonial consciousness especially was critical and pivotal. And neocolonial consciousness is really harmful, very harmful. And these harmful effects are there, some of them tangible, some of them not too tangible. First is that, it brings some inferiority complex, the neocolonial. And this inferiority complex also makes us have a certain lack of confidence in, ourselves, on the part of the victim, and engenders a false or inadequate understanding of the reasons behind our underdevelopment relative to the so-called developed countries. And all these moments combined to reinforce the stereotype that, the Ghanaian or the African milieu is not capable of matching the levels of the advanced industrialized countries. Therefore, this neocolonial consciousness and underdevelopment are mutually reinforcing. And Nkrumah devoted much effort to fighting this, and many of his books attest to this. So was the concept of African personality, where the Ghanaian youth were being trained in citizenship, the Young Pioneer Movement, and so on and so forth. Now, to conclude, there is an outstanding agenda on the consciousness front, and I hope we would have time to, some other occasion to delve into it, and that's decolonizing our educational system. Okay, that's a critical factor. If we do not do that, and we continue, because in the final analysis, stripped to its very essentials, the crisis of underdevelopment is an intellectual crisis. Okay. And I hope I'll have an occasion to explain that. So we need to decolonize our educational system, because the curricula that we are now operating, apart from being tangential to our development aspirations, they also have some built-in commitments to dependency. And this is inimical to our struggle to extricate ourselves from underdevelopment. So this outstanding agenda requires a new crop of leaders, both at the political and then the intellectual level. We need a new breed of actors who are fearless, aggressively independent in their thinking, and they should be prepared to confront the status quo which is inhibiting progress. This requires nothing short of a revolution. And I hope by discourse, our discussion today, what I've presented today, would help trigger that debate and help reinforce the notion that nothing can happen without a struggle, and that the enemy is strong, but the enemy's strength is just directly proportional to how disorganized we are. If we are organized, that strength can collapse. The Vietnamese proved it, the Cubans proved it, and there are several others in history who have proved it. And using Nkrumah's legacy and where he left off, it's possible for us to pick up and then continue the struggle. And, the Cubans will say, a luta continua, Victoria, etc. Is that what it means?
Well, comrades, this is how we set out to observe Ghana's Day of Shame, and it is coming up pretty well. At this stage, we are going to invite our studio audience to make comments and to ask questions. And because time is fast spent, we are going to limit all contributions to not more than 2 minutes each. Then, after this stage, we shall go onto our social media platforms and take messages and comments. And then the last stage, we will invite Dr. Gamal Nasser Adam to make his closing remarks. So this is the time for you, studio audience, and please show by hand if you have a question to ask or comment to make, and we're doing only one round. So if you don't show your hand, finito. So all those who want to ask questions, all those who want to make comments, please show by hand. So please keep showing your hands so that we arrange. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands and 6 hands. So we're going to start with the gentleman in the front and spectacles, and then we come to you, and then we come to you, that's number 3, and we come to you, number 4, and then 5 and 6, 2 minutes each. So we have 12 minutes. The microphone is yours, starting from you.
Good evening, comrades and viewers out there. And I'm really grateful for Dr. Nelson's presentation, and it has really thrown light in my eyes. Mine is a question. You know, in current situation of this country, the masses, the pro-masses are not political oriented. They are political asleep. How can we educate the pro-masses to be political active? Because I strongly believe in social revolution. I don't believe in military revolution or political revolution. I believe if the masses are awakened, there can be a great change within this society or country that we live in. Thank you.
Good evening, comrades. Honestly speaking, the academic dawn has said it all, and there's a little I would like to add. I think that Thursday, February 24th, 1966, undoubtedly should go down as Ghana's day of shame. But for me, it was not a day of shame solely for Ghana, but the entire African continent. Because Ghana, which was the pacemaker, the forerunner and torchbearer of African emancipation, lost it when our first president and prime minister was toppled in a violent coup. For me, Dr. Nkrumah taught me to take pride in being black, because according to him, the black man was capable of managing his own affairs. This statement set the tone for blacks in Africa who had suffered neglect and marginalization, just like their counterparts in America, to the extent that our own Roy Ankara went to faraway UK and defeated Ronnie Clayton to clinch the Commonwealth featherweight title on April 30th, 1951. This was a man whose legacy was second to none, because even after independence, when we had an army where few commissioned officers were not offered the opportunity to serve in respectable and recognizable positions, some of them were transferred, to other branches of the armed forces, where they gave good account of themselves. And with this, I'm making specific reference to Colonel Hansen, who was the first commander of the Ghana Navy, the first chief of naval staff. He was transferred from the army to head the Ghana Navy. We also had an instance where one army officer was also transferred from the army to head the Air Force. And for me, that is an enviable legacy that the leaders we have in Africa must strive to attain. I also believe that Kwame Nkrumah's overthrow also set the pace for imperialist forces to sow the seed of coup-making. And I am strongly against Kotuka being portrayed as a hero. I don't understand why someone who led a rebellious and illicit activity should be portrayed as such. Because for me, naming our airport after him, it's marks of hypocrisy. And I'm sure with time, something will surely be done about that.
Good evening, comrades and viewers up there. I would like to thank Comrade Nelson. He said it all. Anytime I try to arrange a question to put it to him, then he comes back and answers the questions. So I wish to thank him for that. But I will look at the smaller picture. By then I was just 8 years old. And I remember we were just about to go to school. We were dressed in our uniforms when the coup took place. So we were there. I just wonder why all of a sudden the children on the streets created songs and they were singing adversely against Nkrumah. One of the songs, Nkrumah, ya you decode, but they were singing it all over the place. Although at the point in time, Nkrumah had been able to form the youth movements, and we were all part of it. What actually happened, and that situation changed. All of a sudden, there were fears, because I was with the people. Some of us were even singing. All of a sudden, a kind of fear was created, and all Nkrumah just went underground. Some were even burying Nkrumah books and running away. In fact, my grandfather had a lot of money in his house because by then he was a member of Nkrumah. He in fact took the money, everything to the police station and handed it over to the police. Why? What happened? Because by then Nkrumah was on the ground. In fact, I will leave it here, and this is a question for now.
Good evening, everyone. The presentation said something that stuck with me. In order for witches to come into the house, somebody has to open the door. Even though it was, a saying, I think it's very pertinent for the African youth today to be able to identify who are the witches of 2021 and who were the witches of 1966. So that we don't repeat the same mistakes and we are able to identify them much easier as we plan on rebuilding a new socialist Pan-African state that we will call Africa.
Good evening, comrades. Doc, in your presentation, it is very clear that the Western imperialists consistently over all these years have worked hand in hand. They've worked closely with each other. It doesn't matter whether it's UK and America or Belgium and UK or all of them, they've always had a way of working hand in hand. Do you think that the people of the progressive world are working well hand in hand? Are we really strategizing to get ourselves out of this? If no, why is that so? If yes, do you think they're doing it well? If they are not doing it well, probably what is the effects on, our struggle? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Doc. I think that the day Osajefo was overthrown didn't actually send Ghana back. We lost direction. Because I keep hearing that, Ghana is behind the world 200 years, 300 years and all that. And I'm like, what are they talking about? When you are behind someone, it means you can see the person and you know the direction. But we lost direction. So our country is now like a space for rehearsal, practice. So they come and test policies here and they go and implement elsewhere. This morning we heard that vaccines have arrived in Ghana, and if you look at the program outline, there was something like a ceremony. This is a vaccine that Sky News reported as a flight carrying 600,000 doses of AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine has arrived in Ghana as part of a global effort to immunize the world's poorest people. The world's poorest people as my emphasis. Look at the resources we have in this country. Listen to what Doctor said, the kind of human resource that we had and the kind of things that we were manufacturing in this country. How could it be that today of all days, 55 years now, we will receive vaccines from elsewhere with such a ceremony? How? It is shameful. It is really shameful. And I think that it is about time the youth of Ghana and Africa stand up and reset the continent and Ghana. We need to reset so that we know the path to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nasa, for your presentation. I would like you to put clarity on the Ghana, South Korea example and the comparison that you made. I didn't quite get it, if you can re-emphasize it a little. But something struck me a few minutes ago. Kambala was here on the platform. Kambala is from the DRC. And that we know the crisis that is happening in the DRC. And Patrice Lumumba took a lot of inspiration from Osaoje for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah to launch the independence of DRC. Patrice Lumumba himself was killed by the CIA, you know, and the same thing that happened to Osaoje for Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And today, Kambala, we have you in Ghana working with us to see how we can mobilize the youth, to see how we can draw consciousness, which Dr. Nasa himself has put a lot of emphasis on. You know, and this means a lot to me, and I think that today, the 24th of February, the 55th anniversary, you know, should re-energize us to recommit ourselves to the struggle that we have committed to and see what this struggle can lead us to. Thank you very much.
Well, at this stage, we'd like to move on to our social media handles and take a few of the messages which have come on the social media handle. And it is my distinguished pleasure to invite to the microphone Loretta Ashe, who is one of the producers of this show. Loretta, can you please give us all the messages on the social media handles?
Good evening, comrades. Seth Mabel says, they destroyed Atomic Energy Research Institute and put in place Noguchi Research Institute, defeating the good purpose of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in the field of science. Sad. Seth comes back to say, Nkrumah's Ideological Institute is being replaced by Dankwa Ideological Institute. Sad. Then we have a message from AJ. AJ Kassim says, please, I am watching live, but as a Pan-Africanist, I would like to plead with you to help us to reunite our CPP so that you help them with communicators to remove the brainwashed Ghanaians from psychological slavery. Abdul Haq Ibrahim says he's watching from Kanda. And he continues saying, the people of Ghana are becoming more conscious about what is happening in the past and what is happening currently in the political space. Hence, it is just about time we grow beyond imperialism into socialism. Abdul Swala Bassett says, Dr. Nasa is a very fine brain. As a young man in University of Ghana, I used to listen to his lectures on many important issues. Awesome gentleman. Wasif comes back to say, we have just got back to start. Okay, this is about the courts and all that. So then someone asks again, is that Dr. Nasa of University of Ghana? Yes, that is Dr. Nasa. So Damba Mbai says, I'm watching live from Paris. I love Pan-African TV. Abdul Majid says, Chairman all the way. I love you so much, Daddy. Obiba Kobi is saying, I love this platform, always telling the truth. God bless you. Salma Dankofa says, good evening, Uncle Pratt. And it goes on and on. Evelyn says, good. And Ray Robinson says, I want to know why this government wants to kill Dr. Kwame Nkrumah at all costs. And we have Patrick Essien says, the struggle continues. The ideology and Pan-Africanism movement can be made possible again by making his books available in all universities and in Ghana and Africa as a whole. Seth Mabel comes back to say, Intentionally removing Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's books from the shelves of Ghana's library is a shame. The youth needs to be given more lectures on such thought-provoking topics on building the Ghana economy by the founder of the nation Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Bravo. I think that is all. Fred, if you want books on Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, you can get it from the Freedom Bookshop. Thank you.
Well, my only duty at this stage is to call on Dr. Gamal Nasser to make his closing remarks, and I plead with him to make it very short, as we're getting pretty close to news time. But before I do that, I mean, anytime we organize activities like this, we keep getting messages and so on. Why are you not helping the CPP? Why are you not making the CPP to unite? Why are you not making the CPP to adopt these ideas and so on? My brothers and sisters, the answer is very simple. The current leadership of the Convention People's Party does not want people like us near the party. Their agenda, I'm sure, is substantially different from what we're doing here. We are ready to work with anybody and everybody who wants to lift high the flag of Pan-Africanism. We are ready to work with anybody and everybody who is ready to mobilize the masses in struggle against the decadent neocolonial system. And it's for the same reason that there are forces which want to keep us away from some structures. And we are not begging to join any structure. Dr. Gamal Nasser Adam.
Very quick. What happened to children singing against Kwame Nkrumah? I don't think as children they did that spontaneously. Students were marched into the streets to demonstrate at that time. Yeah. So about Nkrumah's, hiding their identity, I don't think that was universal. I remember, at least, the example of my father. He was a proud. I saw a CPP ID card with him, with his contributions, and he was always showing that to us as a symbol of sacrifice, and he always paid glowing tributes to Kwame Nkrumah, despite the fact that his enemies were in power at the time. Now the vaccine, received, and then the ceremony, and the reference to the world's poorest really is pathetic. I think what should have been, the discourse should have rather been the advances we have made in producing our own vaccine. That should have been what Ghana should have been discussing now. Where have we reached? Where have our scientists reached? Our research institutions, where have they reached in their effort to get a vaccine for us? Not to celebrate, leftovers, brought to us to help what they consider the poorest people of the world. And the South Korean thing too. I said, because of the lack of time, I was saying that the comparison is unfair. One, Nkrumah's Nkrumah's development trajectory was truncated, on 24th February 1966. So, and there was every indication that Ghana was poised for an industrial takeoff. The 7-year development plan, what was there, was clear in it. And the histories are also different. In those countries, those so-called Asian tigers were put there as baits, anti-communist baits, because this was a time communism, was spreading in Southeast Asia. So there was a need to tackle it on another front instead of confronting it violently. Set up a show piece as an example for others to aspire to, and what you will benefit if you are keys to imperialism instead of confronting it. How many Asian tigers were there anyway? So the other thing too is that most of those leaders, they were not the imperialism left them to their own devices and never disturbed those countries. Unlike in Ghana, where they put every obstacles and every turn Nkrumah's effort. There wasn't that disturbance. Imperialism left the so-called Asian tigers to embark on their development, agenda. And also, that, mind you, these were not democracies; they were repressive stabilities. Okay, and they also had the benefit of, longevity in their reign. And I mentioned, Lee Kuan Yew, who has always been touted as an example of a successful leader who lifted his country from poor, underdevelopment to, the status of a first world country. He was in power for more than 30 years. Okay, compare that to, Kwame Nkrumah. So these are the main differences. Finally, how do we change, the masses? Comrade Kwesi Pratt just mentioned the problems that we have with the CPP. But at least what were they now? 10 years ago or a few years ago, we didn't have Pan-African TV. Okay, it would have been, the messages were packaging and sending out there. These are little bits, and there's something very interesting happening on the global scale that is making our work, easier, in the sense that it's clear that the system is not working. The system is not working. And so far as we're concerned, at everything, we're always fumbling from one crisis to the other. With all, due apologies. Whether, there's, a political change or not, because the fundamentals, the premise, the economic premise on which, we are operating our so-called, development paradigm, it's wrong. That premise is wrong. We need to change. And very sooner or later, the reality would, dawn on us, and it will be clear that we need an alternative to this present new colonial system of governance. Mr. Kwesi Pratt, it's your time.
Well, what can we say at this stage? I think that it's only appropriate that we say a very, very big thank you to Dr. Gamal Nasser Adam, Vice President for Academic Affairs of the Islamic University in Ghana, for making time to discuss this topic with us. We are most grateful to Dr. Gamal Nasser Adam, and we are hoping that from now on he'll become a regular face in Pan-African television to help us educate ourselves and to contribute to the general education of mankind about the difficulties, the problems, the hunger, and so on that faces all of us. For those of you who came into the studio, we salute you. You are an important segment of this program, and without you, this format will collapse. So we thank you very much for coming into the studio and joining in this discussion. Our very, very, very special people, exceedingly special people, are those of you who are in your homes and offices and in your shops and so on, who constantly tune into Pan-African television. You make us what we are. Without you, who are we? So we'd like to thank you very much for always keeping your dial on Pan-African television. Thank you so very much. And then for those of you who watch on social media, on WhatsApp, on YouTube, who send us messages on WhatsApp and Facebook and so on, we are eternally grateful to you for being part of this healthy, progressive family that is looking for dynamic change which will transform the universe. We thank you very, very much. Finally, I'd like to leave you with some advice. And the advice is this. If you enjoy music, entertainment, dance, if you want to see Nayachidi dancing, some steps and so on. If you want to hear good music from the maestros and so on, keep your dial on Pan-African television, because we give you the best in entertainment. If you're looking for sports, the television platform to turn to is Pan-African television. If you're looking for the best in news and current affairs, Pan-African television. For everything which is the best, tune into Pan-African television. So keep your dial here until we meet again next time. Bye-bye from all of us at Pan-African television, especially our producers, Loretta and Roseanne. And indeed, it is my pleasure to announce that today we had an all-female production team, because the show was also directed by Sawa. Goodbye until we see you again next week. Bye-bye.